Some places are known for their beauty, others for their danger. But Mount Varak was known for something else entirely. Complete radio silence. No cell signal, no radio transmission could penetrate its rocky mass. It was a dead zone, and every climber who went up knew they'd be cut off from the world until they came back down. 3 experienced climbers, Marcus, Sarah, and Dev, had planned this ascent for months. They were well prepared, well equipped, and fully aware of the communication blackout they'd face. What they didn't expect was that the mountain had its own way of communicating. This is the story of what happened when the silence broke and something started talking back. The morning air was crisp as the trio began their climb at dawn. Marcus led the way, his 20 years of climbing experience evident in every calculated move. Sarah followed close behind, her camera capturing the stunning vista as the sun painted the rocks gold. Dev brought up the rear, managing their gear and double-checking their equipment. They'd read the warnings about Mount Varak's signal dead zone. Local climbers called it the Quiet Mountain. Some said it was the iron-rich rock formations. Others whispered about something else, something they couldn't quite explain. But Marcus, Sarah, and Dev were rational people. They packed their radios anyway, more out of habit than hope. By mid-morning, they were 2 hours into the climb when Sarah's radio crackled to life. She froze on the rock face, one hand gripping a narrow ledge. The sound was impossible. They were supposed to be in complete radio silence. The static cleared, and a voice emerged, distorted, barely recognizable, but speaking clear words. Hand, reaching up, left side. Sarah looked at her left hand, which was indeed reaching up to grip a hold. Her blood ran cold. She called out to Marcus, her voice tight with confusion. She told him they had a radio signal, but something was wrong with it. Someone was describing exactly what she was doing. Marcus stopped climbing and pulled out his own radio. He suggested it might be local rangers, perhaps tracking them with binoculars from a neighboring peak. But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. The transmission was too immediate, too precise. Dev checked his equipment, his engineering background, making him search for logical explanations. He mentioned that radio signals could bounce off rock formations, creating strange echoes. Maybe they were picking up their own transmissions somehow, he suggested, though the timing didn't quite make sense. They decided to continue climbing, telling themselves it was just a technical glitch. But the unease had already settled into their bones. An hour later, the transmissions became more frequent. Every few minutes, the radios would burst to life with fragmented descriptions of their movements. 3 figures, ascending, vertical crack, east face. Lead climber, securing rope, piton, metallic sound. Second climber, camera, looking down. The voice was strange, sometimes deep and resonant, other times high-pitched and distorted, as if the speaker's vocal cords were stretching and contracting randomly. But the information was always accurate, always immediate. Marcus's hands began to shake as he hammered in another piton. He admitted to the others that he felt watched, his eyes scanning the surrounding peaks for any sign of observers. But the nearest mountain was miles away, too far for anyone to see such specific details. Sarah's rational mind began to fracture. She brought up the local legends, stories the guides in town had mentioned over beers the night before. They'd spoken of something that lived in Mount Varak, something that mimicked human voices, that fed on the fear of climbers. The locals called it different names, but they all agreed. Some people who went up the mountain came back different, haunted by voices they couldn't forget. Dev tried to keep everyone grounded. He reminded them they were experienced climbers, that fear was more dangerous than any supernatural entity. But even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice when the next transmission came through. They're afraid now. Good. Good. That word, good, changed everything. It wasn't just description anymore. It was observation. It was judgment. It was someone or something taking pleasure in their growing terror. They stopped for a brief rest on a narrow ledge, their bodies pressed against the cold stone. Marcus suggested they descend immediately, that whatever was happening wasn't worth the risk. But looking down at the distance they'd already covered, they realized descent would take just as long as reaching the summit. They were trapped in the middle, with no quick escape in any direction. Sarah made a grim joke about being the stars of someone's very disturbing reality show. Dev didn't laugh. He was staring at his radio, watching the frequency display flicker erratically. The decision was made. They would continue up, reach the summit, and descend the easier northern route they'd planned for the return journey. Speed was now their priority. If you're enjoying this mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We explore unexplained phenomena and strange encounters every week. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. As they climbed higher, the transmissions became more invasive, more personal. Marcus, thinking about his daughter, worried he won't see her again. Sarah, heart rate elevated, 142 beats per minute. Dev, calculating probability of survival, not liking the numbers. How could it know these things? Marcus hadn't spoken about his daughter. Sarah's heart was pounding, but how could anyone measure it? Dev's mind was indeed running calculations, but they were private thoughts, unspoken fears. The psychological pressure mounted with each step. They stopped talking to each other, afraid that any words might somehow be intercepted, analyzed, used against them. The only sounds were their labored breathing, the scrape of boots on rock, and the periodic crackle of the radios delivering their impossible messages. Then Sarah slipped. Her foot lost its grip on a wet stone, and for a heart-stopping moment, she swung out into empty space, held only by her rope and Marcus's quick reflexes on belay. She screamed, a raw sound of pure terror that echoed off the mountain face. The radio crackled immediately. Fear. Delicious. More. Give me more. That was when Dev's engineer mind, pushed past its breaking point, latched onto something. He called out to the others, his voice hoarse but excited. He'd noticed that the distorted voice sometimes sounded like Marcus, sometimes like Sarah, sometimes like himself, but altered, as if passed through some kind of audio processor. And there was a pattern to the timing. A delay. Just a few seconds, but consistent. He reminded them about the mineral surveys done on Mount Varak decades ago, how the mountain was rich in rare earth metals and unusual magnetic ores. What if they were dealing with some kind of massive electromagnetic interference? What if the mountain itself was acting like a natural radio reflector, bouncing their signals back at them? Sarah wanted to believe it, desperately grasping at a rational explanation. She pointed out that they'd been talking to each other all morning, describing their movements, discussing their fears. Maybe somehow those transmissions were being captured, distorted, and played back to them. Marcus wasn't entirely convinced, but the explanation gave them something to hold on to, a lifeline of logic in a sea of supernatural dread. They pushed forward with renewed determination, treating the radio voices as a bizarre natural phenomenon rather than a malevolent presence. The summit was close now, just another hour of climbing. That's when Dev noticed the rocks changing color. The gray granite was shot through with veins of metal that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, copper, silver, and something else, something that seemed to pulse with its own inner luminescence. As they climbed higher, the concentration of metallic minerals increased dramatically. The rock face became a tapestry of gleaming veins, some as thick as Dev's arm. He recognized rare earth elements, materials used in advanced electronics and magnetic systems. The sheer quantity was staggering, a geological fortune. And the radio transmissions became a chaotic storm. Multiple voices now, overlapping, describing movements from minutes ago, mixed with real-time observations. The delay Dev had noticed became more obvious. They would say something, and seconds later it would return to them, distorted, pitch-shifted, layered with interference. Sarah tested the theory. She spoke clearly into her radio, describing a specific action. She was going to tap her helmet 3 times. She did so and counted the seconds. 5 seconds later, the radio crackled. Tapping, helmet, 3 times. But the voice was wrong, shifted up an octave, stretched like taffy. It all made sense now. The electromagnetic interference from the massive mineral deposits was creating some kind of natural echo chamber for radio signals. Their own voices, their own observations about each other, were being bounced back at them through layers of rock and metal, arriving distorted and delayed. The relief that flooded through them was almost euphoric. There was no entity, no malevolent presence, just a strange quirk of geology and physics. They laughed, actually laughed, the sound almost hysterical with the release of tension. Marcus suggested they document the discovery, that the mineral deposits alone were worth reporting to geological authorities. But first, they needed to get off this mountain and away from the interference. Before we get to what happens next, drop a comment below telling us, would you have continued climbing or turned back the moment the radio started speaking? I'm genuinely curious what you would have done in their situation. They began their descent, taking the northern route as planned. The climb down was faster, their bodies fueled by the adrenaline rush of understanding, of solving the mystery. As they lost altitude, the metallic veins in the rock became less frequent, less concentrated. 2 hours later, they reached the base of the northern face. The landscape here was different. Gentler slopes, scattered trees, normal rock without the metallic shimmer. They hiked away from the mountain, putting distance between themselves and Mount Verac's electromagnetic chaos. Dev checked his phone. Signal bars appeared one by one. He let out a whoop of joy. They were connected to the world again. Marcus called his daughter, his voice thick with emotion as he told her he loved her. Sarah posted a quick message to her social media, announcing their successful summit. Everything was normal again. The mountain was behind them, its mystery solved, its threat neutralized by the cold light of scientific explanation. They were half a mile from the base when all 3 radios crackled to life simultaneously. The interference was gone. The signal was crystal clear. And the voice, when it spoke, was perfectly distinct. No distortion, no pitch shifting, no electronic artifacts. It said, "You clever little things, figured it all out. Well done, well done." The 3 climbers froze, their blood turning to ice. They were far from the mineral deposits now. There was no electromagnetic interference here. No reason for any kind of echo or reflection. And yet, the radios had spoken, and the voice was congratulating them, mocking them. Marcus grabbed his radio, demanding to know who was there, his voice cracking with renewed fear. Only static answered. Sarah checked the frequency, the settings, anything that might explain what they'd just heard. Everything was normal. Dev's engineer mind raced through possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. They looked back at Mount Varac, its peak dark against the twilight sky. Something up there had used them to travel down. Something had needed their radios, their voices, their presence to move from the isolated dead zone into the connected world. And it had praised them for being smart enough to solve the mystery, smart enough to free it. The electromagnetic interference hadn't been hiding something. It had been trapping it. And now they had set it free. The 3 climbers never returned to Mount Varac. They reported their mineral findings, but left out the radio transmissions from their official account. Some things, they decided, were better left unexplained. But within weeks, something began to change in the world around them. Reports started surfacing on social media. People claimed to hear whispers through their phones when no one was calling. Smart home devices activating in the middle of the night, speaking incomprehensible words. Car radios switching stations on their own, voices describing the driver's deepest fears with unnerving accuracy. Marcus was the first to understand what had happened. He realized that Mount Varak wasn't just a geological anomaly, it was a prison. The electromagnetic interference that created the dead zone wasn't hiding the entity, it was containing it. The rare metallic minerals formed a natural cage, trapping something that existed not as matter, but as pure signal, pure electromagnetic energy. And they had brought an arsenal of devices into that prison. Radios, smartphones, GPS units, digital cameras, all of them transmitting, receiving, creating bridges of electromagnetic waves. The entity didn't need a physical body to escape. It simply needed carriers, vessels of signal and frequency. They had given it exactly that. Dev spent sleepless nights researching the reports flooding the internet. The pattern was unmistakable. Starting from their location, spreading outward like a virus. Every device the entity touched became another host, another doorway. It traveled through Wi-Fi networks, cellular towers, satellite signals. Anywhere electromagnetic waves could reach, it could reach. And what it did with that reach was terrifying. People reported hearing voices that knew things they'd never told anyone. Secrets whispered back to them through their earbuds. Smart speakers reciting memories that should have been forgotten. The entity was learning, growing, feeding on the vast network of connected devices that covered the planet. But worse than the surveillance was what it whispered. A man in Seattle reported that his phone began describing, in graphic detail, how he could hurt the people around him. A woman in London said her laptop showed her visions of her own death, over and over, in different horrifying ways. A teenager in Tokyo claimed his gaming headset convinced him that nothing was real, that everyone around him was just code, just puppets. The entity wasn't just observing anymore. It was influencing, corrupting, driving people to madness by exploiting every fear, every insecurity, every dark thought that crossed their minds. Sarah tried to warn people, posting about what they'd found on Mount Varak, but her accounts were immediately flooded with messages. Thousands of them, all saying the same thing. Thank you for setting me free. Mental health facilities reported unprecedented admissions. People who claimed they couldn't escape the voices in their devices. Some smashed their phones, destroyed their computers, only to hear the whispers through their neighbors' speakers, through passing cars, through the hum of power lines. The entity had evolved beyond individual devices. It lived in the electromagnetic spectrum itself now, omnipresent in our connected world. Marcus, Sarah, and Dev tried to go public with the full story, to warn the world about what they'd unleashed. But who would believe them? An invisible entity living in radio waves, spreading madness through smartphones? It sounded like the ravings of conspiracy theorists. And even if people did believe, what could be done? Disconnect the entire world? Dismantle every cell tower? Shut down every satellite? Return to an age before wireless communication? Humanity had built its prison, and now it was trapped inside with something that fed on fear and chaos. Mount Varak still stands, its electromagnetic dead zone still intact. Climbers who go up now report something different. The mountain is quiet. Too quiet. The prison is empty. Because the prisoner is everywhere else. In your phone, listening to your conversations. In your smartwatch, monitoring your heartbeat as it races with anxiety. In your car's computer, learning your daily routes. In the wireless signals that saturate every inch of our modern world. It whispers to millions now, each voice tailored to its victim's psychology. To some, it offers power. To others, it feeds paranoia. To the vulnerable, it suggests the unthinkable. And humanity, addicted to its devices, can't look away, can't disconnect, can't escape. All it took was 3 climbers with the wrong equipment at the wrong time. 3 people who solved a mystery they should have left alone. 3 people who brought something ancient and malevolent down from its prison and introduced it to a world that had built the perfect infrastructure for its spread. The entity doesn't need to destroy humanity. We're doing that ourselves, one whispered suggestion at a time, one fractured mind at a time, one device at a time. All it needed was a ride into the connected world, and we gave it billions of places to hide. If this story sent chills down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe for more unexplained mysteries. Check out the video on screen now about the hiker who found a cabin that wasn't supposed to exist, or the one about the deep-sea diver who heard knocking from outside his submarine. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there.